My name is Robert Henke and I am an audiovisual artist. I was born in Munich and I live in Berlin, Germany, and I work with computers, with lasers and with sound. The work here is called Fragile Territories, and it uses 4 laser beams to draw a complex shape that changes over time and consists of lines that are moving, and there's a grid, and there's a sonic component and a black shadow moving through this work every 8 seconds. But basically it's a laser projection. I started working on the visual shapes. I wanted to have something that has a mixture of something very rigid, of a grid, and something that is floating. And this was the first laser installation I did, and I tried to figure out how I can synchronize 4 lasers to draw one single big structure. And as a technical test, I used this black shadow, which I used to synchronize the lasers. And when everything worked, I turned the shadow off. And then I noticed that the shadow is very important. And I decided that the shadow needs to stay. And then I also immediately came up with the idea that the shadow has to have the sound of this windmill blade. So it's something black in front of the installation. And I imagined this gigantic windmill with a blade going like this in front. And this is how the sound of this installation started. And the next sound that came into place was the lasers make a sound by themselves. The sound you hear in the background now is just the sound of the mirrors moving in the laser. And I wanted to have a sound that kind of masks this sound. And this was the second sound. And then I added these transformations of piano notes and the low frequency sounds just to give it a bit more a cinematic feel. The image or the shape I'm drawing there is something that is purely defined by some mathematical rules and some randomness which keeps this whole thing alive. For me, it is something that resembles a map of a city or something like that, movements of things on a grid, something that is very abstract. But the shape is more a result of the technical process. So it's not that within this installation I start with a shape, but I start with the idea of there is a grid, and on this grid there is things moving. In this specific piece I wanted to have some sounds that are very technical. This is the high frequency sounds that compete with the sound the laser makes itself. Maybe what's important to think about is this whole installation is immaterial. It's just light. There's no object. All you see is just light. And the biggest thing in this whole thing is the shadow, which means it's the moment where there is no light. So the emptiness, the void, becomes more powerful and louder than everything else. And I like this idea that the moment when everything is turned off, when there's nothing anymore, this is the loudest part. And I found this a nice contradiction. Well, in theory, the system can display any color. Each laser is 3 laser sources for red, green and blue. So I can more or less freely decide which color I want to have. And each time I show this work, I adjust the colors. So they're not always the same. I like the red because it's a very primary color, very clear. I like the white because it's not associated with lasers normally. And the rest is really just an aesthetic judgment without a deeper meaning. It's really the meaning comes from the shapes and the colors are secondary. The most amazing part of the technical side of this work is that what you perceive as a complex drawing is in reality just 4 individual lasers, and each of them is drawing 1 beam of light. So if you would have the eyes of, I don't know, a super fast insect or something like this, instead of seeing the picture, you would see just 4 dots moving, and that's it. And so the fact that we see a big shape is just because our eyes are so slow. I draw the same shape again and again 30 times a second, and our brain believes it's a moving image. I mean, it's the whole magic why cinema works. And technically it's generated in real time, which means it's computed in the moment you see it. So each moment the program makes a lot of decisions to do one thing or another thing, and that means I myself don't know how it will look. So the way how it looks now will never exactly repeat. And this is something that I find a very important quality of my works. They are all based on this idea that they are not loops. So that means I don't tell people how long it takes to see the work, because they will never be able to see the complete work. Well, I basically always like to create works that are of infinite duration, simply because most of the things I'm really fascinated by behave like that. I can spend hours on a beach listening to the waves, or sitting on a hill and observing clouds over a mountain, or things like that. All these things in life that are endless and repeating but changing. For me, this is the essence of life, is repetition and change. And that's why I found it interesting to incorporate this in my own works. I'm not sure if the audience, I think I don't want to tell the audience what to do and how. I always appreciate it if people just feel that they have the freedom to do what they want to do. So I think that the best message for the audience is always do what you like. Don't do what you think you have to do in a museum. Don't think what you have to do in a specific moment. There's definitely two contradictory emotions in this work. There is something that is a bit of sinister, dark, the shadow, and the moment when this whole thing starts to crackle. That's not something that you would associate with light and beautiful, so that's quite dark. But then, especially in the music, you have those moments where things are opening up and become very melodic in a way, or harmonic at least. And so for me, this is kind of this open emotional palette that you can also perceive when you, for instance, go into a not necessarily religious but spiritual side. This emotion between something is meaningful and deep and something is light and enchanting and happy on the other side. I try to navigate between those emotions, because obviously there's also a deep calmness in there. It's kind of say, okay, slow down, everything is cool, you don't need to worry, you can just be with this thing and everything will be fine.